There are people who may not have bloodlines, but who have converted to Judaism. Are they going to be able to live here? Are you going to kick them out?
By your standards, they can't live here
No,
because
I've
you've just
never
told
said
me
no.
they have a right to live here because God gave them the land because they're the descendants of Abram.
They're the descendants of Abraham. But if they're the spiritual descendants of Abraham and they've now decided that they're converting to Judaism, then do they have a right to live in Israel?
Did you hear that? Spiritual descendants of Abraham. Ambassador Huckabee, can you explain to me why Jews are spiritual descendants of Abraham? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Today we have a very important episode talking about the Tucker Carlson interview he did with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to hearing ever since I heard he was going to do it. And I've been very anxious to get to this podcast. It's just, it came at a bad time with a lot going on a weekend, but we're finally getting to it. And I have a lot to say about this. And there is a lot of things that were mentioned in there. I'm surprised more people aren't talking about. There were some very important moments, and we are going to talk about them. This might be a longer program. I have several clips, so much to say about this interview, but this was one that was exciting for me for many reasons. One, I'm a Baptist. Mike Huckabee is a Baptist. And I knew what he was going to be saying was going to be reflective of what many Baptists believe. I knew many independent fundamental Baptists would be watching that interview. I was hoping it was going to be like the Ted Cruz interview. Unfortunately, it was not. I think the reason for that, when Tucker Carlson did the Ted Cruz interview, you can tell he despises Ted Cruz, and I do too. I think Ted Cruz deserves that. Tucker Carlson had the gloves off. Mike Huckabee, though, is almost impossible to despise. I understand his Zionist positions are abhorrent. However, as a person, Mike Huckabee comes off as a very genuine, likable individual. And you can get offended me saying that because you hate his position so much, but you can't help but like the guy. He's a very nice guy. I know people that know him, and they will tell you he's a wonderful individual. I have no reason to doubt that. I do think, though, his dispensationalism, his Zionist theology is bad, and it is very dangerous. I was very, normally I would be excited about a Huckabee being in any kind of position of power. But when I heard he was going to be the ambassador to Israel, I thought, this is awful. Here you've got a just full-blown dispensational Zionist being put in a position like that. This is going to be terrible. And obviously it is. And so I don't have any hatred for Mike Huckabee. I do have a hatred for certain theology. And I love my dispensational Baptist brethren. That's where I come from. So I can't help that. And don't judge me for that. But either way, I think Tucker Carlson should have took the gloves off for this interview. People are already trying to act like he was being a jerk with Huckabee. And I get that, but there is a lot of tension and hostility when it comes to these views. I get it. So, but either way, I want to focus on the content of some of the things that were said in this interview. I think there were some missed opportunities by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is not a theologian. I think he is a fantastic reporter. I think he is a sincere individual when it comes to the scriptures. Unfortunately, famous people typically get their theology from other famous people. And I do not believe him to be a saved man. However, I believe if he were presented the truth, I personally think he probably would get saved. But unfortunately, celebrities hang with celebrities. So the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty slim. But man, I would love it if it happened because I do. I like Tucker Carlson. And I have no problem saying that. But I do want to say, when it comes to the whole thing of Tucker Carlson being detained, I don't really think that was that weird. In fact, the first time I ever went to Israel, it was kind of hilarious. One of the men that was with our group that was from our church, a close personal friend of mine, his name was Kevin. He actually, when we were getting ready to head back home, he got pulled out of our group, and he wasn't taken into another room or anything, but he was taken off to the side, and they were asking him a lot of questions, and it really freaked him out. And you could see he was visibly scared. And my dad's video him. I have a picture that I took, and we're all standing in line laughing as he's talking to him. And I remember all of a sudden, though, I quit laughing real quick because there was one moment when we can't really hear what he's saying, but all of a sudden, I look at him and he turns around and points directly at me and says, "He has a knife." And I remember I immediately thought, I'm dead, because I had bought this really cool, like Arab looking souvenir knife. Yeah, that had a sharp edge and everything. But it was in my carry-on bag. I was told I was allowed to do that. And I was just like, "It's in my check bag. It's in my and the lady was like, "It's okay," but it scared me to death. But that's what we get for laughing at him while he was being interrogated. So they do stuff like that. I don't know that's why they did that with Tucker Carlson, but either way, I didn't think it was that weird that he got some kind of extra scrutiny or anything like that. It's not America over there. But also, um, I agree with what Tucker said about the personality of Huckabee. Kind of before that, he talked about how he's a nice guy, likes him. All that stuff's true. I do think Mike Huckabee deserves a ton of respect for doing this interview after the beatdown that Ted Cruz took. Considering the fact Ted Cruz is still constantly doing damage control because of his disastrous interview, that took a lot of guts and confidence for Mike Huckabee to do the interview. But he should have. He absolutely should do interviews. He is an ambassador to Israel. Tucker Carlson is a respected reporter. A lot of people follow him. If Huckabee truly believes he is right, he should welcome an opportunity to be challenged by someone like Tucker Carlson. And these pansies out there who won't do that deserve no respect whatsoever. Tucker Carlson is tough, but he does ask fair questions. And if he is unfair, you should assume that the audience will be smart enough to understand that they were being unfair, and it shouldn't hurt you. If Tucker Carlson is going to treat you unfairly, that will reflect bad on him if intelligent people are watching it. But if you assume Americans are a bunch of dumb sheep, I could see why you would be afraid of that. It's kind of like Baptists who are afraid to come on this program, and they say it's because they think they'll be treated unfairly. Well, okay, if that were to happen, it's not going to, but if it were to happen, that would make me look bad, not you. But if you're afraid, it would be, if you're afraid that that would hurt people who follow you, you must assume they're really dumb. And I'm tired of politicians assuming everybody's dumb. And I get it. A lot of people are. But, I'm not. So I personally would like to see these kind of interviews. And I'm glad Mike Huckabee did it. But either way, we're going to go ahead and start getting into this. We're going to show several clips, and I've got a lot of things to say about them. And we're going to kind of do these clips in not necessarily order of importance, but order that they came in the interview. So here's the first one I want you to see, because I specifically talked about this in one of the podcasts where I talked about Mike Huckabee.
Ask you, everyone I've talked to in preparation for this has said the same thing. Jonathan Pollard.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw the name to you and have you explain.
No, I'm glad you asked.
Of course.
Interestingly, there's been a lot of things about it. You're the first person who has asked me about it, which I find amazing. So I'm glad you did.
Really?
Yeah, the very first
Good.
person.
Well, it's better to hear it.
Sure.
All right. So now many people are not familiar with Jonathan Pollard. You know why? Because you watch mainstream news and they tell you what to be outraged about, and you faithfully and loyally get outraged about whatever they tell you to get outraged about. What they ignore, you ignore. Okay? A lot of people who are probably going to watch this are what I call Fox News Baptists. You know nothing about Jonathan Pollard. Okay, but understand, him meeting with Mike Huckabee was a big deal. And the fact that Tucker Carlson is the first person to talk to him about that is shocking. I couldn't believe it when Mike Huckabee said that. There are certain people who I watch who've talked a lot about that, but the mainstream Fox News, They haven't talked about that kind of thing. And that's why you don't know about it and you don't care. And I don't want to go through everything about who Jonathan Pollard was, but he was an American who was spying for Israel. As an American, he is a traitor to our country. Mike Huckabee gave his answer for why he met with them. I didn't think his answer was that great. What bothered me about his response is that so much of what ambassadors do, people in Mike Huckabee's place do, they're trying to keep relations between countries good. They're trying to represent their people over there. I understand all that kind of thing. And so you would think the optics of meeting with a Jonathan Pollard for any reason, he would be careful with something like that. But you know what? He knew he didn't need to be, because he knows our news media is not going to care about him meeting with a traitor to our country like that. And where the reality is, if someone on the left did something like that, there would be an absolute meltdown, outrage. It's just a huge double standard. But Mike Huckabee, he knew he didn't have any reason to be concerned about it because the news media, mainstream news media, wouldn't care. But we should care about things like that. What bothers me about that is, while this guy is a traitor, did several years in prison, and then was released basically, though, and allowed to move to Israel because, he shouldn't be able to stay in America. That's who he spied for. Somebody like myself, I would never be able to get, a meeting with Ambassador Huckabee. If anything happened to me when I go over to Israel, he's not going to give me the time of the day, but they will for people like this. So to me, it should be offensive to most Americans that these high up people, the regular law-abiding citizens who've never done anything negative to our country, we could not get in a position to meet with somebody like Huckabee. And I would love to. I would love to interview Mike Huckabee. I would love to ask him some questions similar to Tucker's. I would love to ask him some follow-ups that I wish Tucker Carlson would have asked, but I'll never get that opportunity. You know why? Because I'm just a regular citizen. I have no power. I have no money. And so, I am offended by that. And I didn't particularly care for his answer on that. I'm just shocked that nobody has asked him about it. But you know what? That's just kind of how it is in America. We care about what the news media tells us to care about. So let's watch this next one too, because this is an important thing that, for whatever reason, our news media never wants to talk about. I'm glad Tucker Carlson asked this question. Answer, also very disappointing. But
would the Israeli government harbor fugitives from justice in the United States?
I'm not sure that
there are dozens and dozens and dozens. In fact, there's an Israeli group that keeps track of them that is dedicated, Jewish Israeli group dedicated to combating the molestation of children, and keeps a long list. And you can look it up. And
Tucker, I hope you're not saying that you think the Israelis support the molestation of children.
Obviously, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Now, did you see that dodge that he did there? No, it is a fact that there have been many Israeli citizens and things, or that are dual citizen people who have committed horrific crimes over in this country, and then they go find refuge in Israel, and we do nothing about it. And he's asking about this. And Huckabee, you don't think they support molestation of children? Nobody's saying that they are promoting that people go out and molest children. We are saying they are being protected in many cases. Why is this being allowed? I guarantee you, when I go over to Israel, if I were to do something to a child, if I were to commit some kind of crime, and I try getting back to America, something's going to be, they're going to want to do something to me over there. They're not going to let me come back to America in a situation like that. So why do we do that? And again, he kind of dodges. Are you trying to say they support, like he's making him out to be bad for making some kind of crazy accusation? And I just think that's ridiculous. I'm glad he brought up this kind of thing. But what's interesting about his answer, he just kept saying, I don't know about that. When it came to a lot of the specifics, he kept saying, I don't know about that, which also makes sense because an ambassador, he is about foreign relations And so he is mainly going to know about what the mainstream news media is talking about. And that was my takeaway from this. Mike Huckabee only focuses on what Fox News talks about. Tucker talks about things the mainstream media ignores, which is why we like him. And this is why, we all know about it. A lot of people watch this program know about it. But I do. I believe Huckabee when he says, I don't know what this is about. I just think it's a shame he doesn't know about these things. If it's not on Fox News, it's not happening in his world. And that's why Huckabee is a great example of a Fox News Baptist. Many of you who watch this who are dispensational, you don't know about that stuff either. You know why? Because you're a Fox News Baptist. If Fox News isn't talking about it, it's not happening. But these things are happening. Many documented cases. And he can give his example. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Yeah, exactly. Because you get all your information from Fox News. And so I think that is really a shame. And again, some of these answers too, they were not only disappointing, but they were things too that probably should have, caused some outrage. But again, if the news media is not talking about it, then it's not happening. And again, it's a shame the way we are about these things. And so let's go and watch this next clip. This is a little bit longer one. We'll probably comment through it.
I want to get to as I said at the outset, I said something awful that I regret that my wife barked at me about. I lashed out at Christian Zionists and evangelicals, and I just want to say again that I'm sorry. I've always liked them because they're pro-life and they're also really nice people. So,
yeah, and I like that Tucker apologized for that. Sometimes in our hatred for false doctrine, we can get a little too personal with people who hold that false doctrine. We got to watch out for that. So Tucker apologized for that, but let's keep watching.
For the third time, I'm sorry that I said that. I think part of my problem was I don't understand the theology, and you are not a fake Baptist minister. You're an actual minister. You had a church for many years. You're an actual theologian. So, and I mean this with sincerity, I hear people say, those who bless Israel will be blessed. I know it's a reference to Genesis. I don't understand the connection between that concept and modern Israel and the geopolitical world. And so I'm going to stand back and ask
let's first define, because, from my days as a debater in high school and college, one of the things I knew, you didn't start the debate till you defined the terms.
Amen.
Let's define the terms.
Thank you.
Okay, now what Huckabee is about to do here is very important. It's very good. It's very important if you want to have an honest conversation and not want to be talking back past each other. Because Tucker Carlson's trying to understand some things here. Now, I do agree. I don't think Tucker Carlson fully understands dispensationalism and where Mike Huckabee is coming from. And so it made it difficult for him here to really know how to ask certain questions, some clarifying things. And so while Huckabee tried to set this up for an honest conversation, it does kind of get derailed a little bit. But this is important because this is something I have been screaming from the housetops, and that is, are you connecting modern Israel to the Israel of the Bible? I get it; they have the same name. That doesn't mean that they are connected. I could have, if my parents would have named me Jesus, that doesn't make me the Jesus of the Bible. And just because in 1948, what was started during that time called itself Israel, doesn't mean they are the Israel of the Bible. If you are going to claim some kind of connection, you need to have a biblical way of doing this. And so Huckabee is going to come very short of doing that. And this is where, too, he is going to say some things that are very wrong. And I don't think Tucker understands doctrine, scriptures, theology enough to really know where Huckabee was going wrong on this. But let's go ahead and watch some more, because again, I like what he was trying to do here. It kind of falls short, though.
Thank you. What is a Christian Zionist? What does that mean to you? What does it mean?
I don't know. It's the people who call me a Nazi for asking what Israel means. I mean, that's kind of my, I don't even know.
But here's the point. If you say a Christian Zionist is a person who has a brain virus and is guilty of heresy, that's a pretty big charge.
I know. I shouldn't have made it. I made it out of anger and ignorance.
So,
well, and again, theologically, it is a very dumb theology. Okay. And so saying somebody has a brain virus, that's just an insult. And I think there are plenty of reasons we could insult dispensationalism and Christian Zionism. Insults don't prove anything, though. Okay. I understand insults. I like them, but they're not really productive. And so Huckabee is going to try to explain what a Christian Zionist is here. But understand this doesn't work. What he tries to do here, Tucker Carlson shouldn't have let it work.
I'm Christian, I think we can agree, is somebody who follows Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Has a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, believes in his death, burial, resurrection, has repented of one's sins, and have accepted him as one's Savior. Would that be fair?
Amen.
Christian. Define that. Zionist. A Zionist simply means a person who believes that the Jewish people have a right to have a homeland where they have security and safety. Did you believe that the Jews have a right to live in Israel? Do you believe that Jews have a right to live in Israel? That would be a Zionist. That's all a Zionist is.
Okay. So I want to stop there because I don't have a problem with Jews having a homeland. I want them to be safe. I don't want to kill them. I don't want to hurt them. Tucker Carlson doesn't either. Okay. That does not make me a Zionist. Okay. And it definitely doesn't make me a Christian Zionist. Okay. He tried to make it as though if you're a Christian and if you want Jews to survive, you're a Christian Zionist. Okay. I am definitely a Christian. I'm definitely want Jews to survive. Here's the problem with Christian Zionism, though. It's teaching that the modern day Jews have a biblical right to a land in the Middle East. And I am here to tell you that the way they are connecting modern Israel to the Israel of the Bible is not right. It is wrong. No, the modern day Jews do not have a biblical right to any land. Okay? That's just not true. And so, but that doesn't mean I want them to die. It doesn't mean I don't want them to have a land or anything like that. Huckabee is going to get into this. I do believe they have a right to exist as a nation because they've won wars, because they have conquered land. And that's how many nations have come to be. They've gone and they've possessed land. They have set up governments. They have thrived as a society. And, to the victors go the spoils. And so I'm not out to go and just destroy any nation that's out there. And that would include the nation of Israel. But my problem is I am being told that when it comes to this one particular government in the Middle East, I am supposed to support them in whatever they do because of the Bible. I'm sorry, that is wrong. Okay. And that's my problem. Okay. There is not a nation on this earth I'm trying to eliminate from the map. There is not an ethnic group I want to see I'm trying to destroy. I believe in evangelizing the world, not killing the world. And so that's my problem with Zionism is the claims that it's making for Israel, they're saying are based on the Bible, but they're based on a gross misuse of the scriptures. And so I just want to make it clear. I am completely against Zionist theology. I am against the politics because I do believe that nation of Israel is committing some pretty horrific acts against the Palestinians. I don't want to see Israelis or Palestinians die. And I will say too, when it comes to the conflict over there, I don't even really know what the solution is. Okay. I'm not out to derail what America's trying to accomplish, what Israel's trying to accomplish. I'm not really interested in any of that. I am interested in the theology, though, driving a lot of it. And so when I see people using a bad theology to support some complicated things and some things that look pretty bad, I've got a huge problem with it. Because as a minister of the Word of God, as somebody who is trying to promote Christianity and belief in the Word of God, I think they are hurting us as Christians when our government is supporting things that are horrific and saying, it's because of the Bible. No, you're making the Bible look bad when you do that. We shouldn't let people get away with this.
Million questions about what all of those terms mean.
Yeah.
But conceptually, I wish Israel no harm. I don't want to see them.
You want them to have a place where they can live with safety and security?
Yeah, and understand about that. I want them to have a place too. The problem is, in 1948, they chose a place right smack in the middle of the Middle East. Okay, and I get why they want that particular spot. I get that, but understand, for a very long time, that place has been completely filled and surrounded with Muslims. And so if you go and you try to start a Jewish state right in the middle of a bunch of Muslim countries, you're probably going to have some problems. You can just mark it down. If I just decide that I want to start a Christian nation, I mean, don't Christians have the right to exist? What if I do that? What if I say I want to start a Baptist nation? You don't think Baptists have a right to exist? Oh, and by the way, I want to start my Baptist nation right smack in the middle of China. We're going to go right into the middle of China, and we're going to go take over that. We're going to we'll go to smaller villages where they're primitive or whatever. We'll slaughter those people, run them out, set up camp there, and then we're going to declare ourselves a Baptist nation. And any people who have a problem with us being there just hate Baptists. You hate Baptists. You're just anti-Baptist, and everyone should support us. And if you don't support us, you just hate Christians. You hate Baptists. Do y'all see how foolish that reasoning is? But again, you think it's different because of a bad interpretation of Genesis 12, Genesis 15, 17. You do think that an ethnic group has right to a hunk of land in the Middle East. And you're wrong about that. And we've proved that in a million ways on this program.
I saw this recently in an extremely telling exchange between the lieutenant governor of Texas, who I know and I've always liked, and a woman I don't know, never met, who's on the Religious Liberty Commission or something. And she said, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not a Zionist. And they had this ferocious exchange. And he kept saying, and everyone on the panel seemed to keep saying, you have to believe in Israel's right to exist, which I've never kind of questioned, just for the record, but it did raise two questions I think are really important, and I hope you'll answer them. One is, where does that right come from?
I would say it comes from, essentially, you could say it comes from the Bible. I would say that it does. But it comes also from a long iteration of historical precedents going to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. It comes from the League of Nations 1927. It comes from the United Nations 1947,
right.
The Declaration of Independence of the Israel State in May of 1948. They were immediately attacked. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1956. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1967 by 5 countries. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. They won the war. The point is, does Israel have a right to exist? They also had wars in 1982 in Lebanon. They've had the intifadas, 2 of those. They've had
Lebanon again in 06. I was there. No, I'm very familiar with
everything Huckabee said right there, except for the Bible, is why I believe they do have a right to exist. It's why I'm not interested in hurting them, wiping them out. To the victors go the spoils. Okay, they won. They conquered the land. I can't go back and undo history. So I don't like how I probably wouldn't either. But at the same time, we can't go back and undo history. And so, yes, that's why they're there. But this biblical claim, this is where I have a problem. And You can't prove it from the Bible, and Huckabee certainly is not going to do that. Nobody can. They don't, but yet at the same time, that's how they're getting Christians on board. That's how they're getting the evangelicals on board. And I'll say more about why that's so important for them to have Christians, just supporting the Zionist theology. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, people, independent fundamental Baptists, let me just say it's a lot of independent fundamental Baptist pastors. They act like a bunch of blue-haired feminists whenever I saw a pastor doing it yesterday, like a blue-haired feminist liberal. He's, talking about, Bible-believing Christians don't hate Jews. And it's just like, why is that your go-to? Somebody calls out bad theology, bad politics. You just hate all the people. What are they doing? They're just trying to condemn you with something. Why? Because they're not capable of arguing the politics. They're definitely not capable of arguing the Bible on those things. So they just condemn you as a hater, as an anti-Semite. And let me just say, you're useless as an American, as a theologian, as a preacher, when you resort to those kind of methods. I don't hate Jews. I don't hate Israel. I don't want them to cease to exist or anything like that. I do believe they legitimately won wars and things, and therefore they are there. I'm not trying to undo history. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to call out your massive misuse of the scriptures.
State.
Okay.
Pretty familiar, I think. And
but a Zionist simply means somebody who believes that Israel has a right to exist. Now, the question is, do you believe Israel has a right to exist?
I guess. I mean, I want Israel to exist. Well, no, but I want to know what that means. So, do other countries have a right to exist?
Well, they do exist.
Yeah. This is good what Tucker does here. Because, and Huckabee, it wasn't really taking the bait. But yeah, I don't want Ireland to cease to exist. I don't want England to cease to exist, or Switzerland, or really any country. But what Tucker's trying to do is he's trying to get Huckabee to admit, I think there's something special about this particular nation because of the Bible. And Huckabee didn't quite take the bait on that. But Tucker, what he's trying to do, Huckabee's trying to show there that, it's because of wars and it's because of all these other things. And so, Tucker Carlson is trying to see if he's going to be consistent when it comes to other nations, because Baptists don't think Israel is like every other nation. They don't. And he was trying to get him to admit it, and he didn't really take the bait.
To exist. You keep saying Israel has a right to exist, and I want to know what other countries have a right.
Legal right, because every international body in the last 100 years has said the Jewish people have a right to their indigenous homeland.
My question
so that's a legal right.
What other?
Do they have a biblical right? I would say that yes, but you may say they don't.
I don't know. I'm actually sincerely interested in finding out what you mean by a biblical right. But first, to the legal right, does any other country on the planet have the same right that Israel has to exist?
Well, you could say, does Jordan have a right to exist? When it was Transjordan and the Brits came and divided up the Middle East, and they gave some land to Jordanians, and they gave some land to the Saudis, and they gave some land to various Middle Eastern countries, and it was all carved up. And the French gave Lebanon its right to exist. Do they have a right to exist?
Do they?
Well, why not?
Okay. Every country.
Does the U.S. have a right to exist?
I'm asking you.
Okay, and I'm telling you, I think the U.S. has a right to exist.
Okay.
We came here. We came there. We're in Israel now talking. But does the U.S. have a right to exist? Does anyone question whether we have a right to exist?
I don't. Yeah, but I, of course, I'm for America.
Good for you.
But so every current country on the map has the same right to exist that Israel has. Is that what you're saying?
I think what we're saying is that when a country has established itself and it is following international law, it has been deemed by numerous bodies that it is indigenous to its homeland, as Israel is. This is its homeland. It goes back 3,800 years to the time of Abraham. It's not that the Jewish people just showed up here in 1948 and said, we're going to have some land.
Hold on. So those are two different tracks, and I just want to make sure that we separate them so I understand each one separately.
All right.
So you're saying there's the modern legal framework, And so you said a country that abides by international law has a right to exist.
I would say that is a part of its existence.
Would the inverse be true, that a country that does not abide by international law forfeits its right to exist?
Not necessarily, if it has the capacity to stay and make its case known. But there have been Jewish people in this land,
okay, but that's
in this very land, for 3,800 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, when it comes to that, I mean, that's probably true. But at the same time, too, if your government falls, which it did in 70 AD, and when it takes another almost 1,900 years before you set up another one, you can't really be surprised if people question your legitimacy. Now, nobody more than me, recognizes and believes, and he talks about it. I don't know if I have the clips on here, about things in the city of David and all the stuff they're finding that's connecting the Jews to that land. I agree with all that. My thing is, though, the modern day Jews don't have a biblical connection to the Jews of the Old Testament. And I'll explain a lot more of why that is later. Because that it's theological reasons. Okay. Now, when it comes to the ethnicity, absolutely. Okay. There's absolutely a connection there. But again, I don't believe that there's anything in the scriptures that claims that because somebody has a bloodline, that gives them this forever right to the land. You can't show me that in scriptures. And I've been trying to get some dispensational Baptists on here to do that. And they're not going to, not because they're not going to be treated fairly, because you can't do it. You can't make a biblical connection. You can make an emotional connection. You can say Bible believing Christians always stand with Israel. You can throw out some one-liners. You can call me an anti-Semite and a bunch of other names, but you can't make a biblical connection.
Ooh. But you're saying, as the modern nation state with borders and a military and a Knesset and just all the kind of trappings of a modern country, all of which I support, that country every country on the planet has the same right as Israel to exist because it does exist. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to understand the concept here.
Well, I think what we're trying to get to is Christian Zionism, and you've taken this way off the road here.
I don't know that I have. I don't mean to. Christian Zionism is a separate thing, but I just keep hearing people say Zionism is the belief
that's the fundamental argument that's going on. Does Israel have a right to live in their indigenous, ancient, historical land, a land that has been affirmed throughout international organizations, a land that has direct ties to the Jewish people?
I just want to know if this is a universal principle. I guess that's what I'm getting at, because if it's not, then it's meaningless to me, because as a Christian, I believe in universal principles. Something is right for everyone or it's wrong for everyone. We don't believe in special cases.
But here's the question. If the Jews didn't have this land, would the Jews have a right to any land?
I don't know. I'm not attacking the Jews. I'm asking if...
Well, I would like to ask Huckabee this. Do the Baptists have a right to a land? And do the Methodists have a right to a land? And again, I guess if they find a land, if there's a land not being used, not being occupied, if it is, and they take it over militarily, and possess it, then I guess they do. This is biblical right. And so he, accused Tucker of taking it way off the path. But I think what happened is Tucker's trying to understand, Huckabee's reasoning, and he's wanting to kind of know the biblical reasoning. But then and asking Huckabee, in all fairness too, when he's asking about, if it's just as biblical, Huckabee goes into all these other, legal, political reasons. And again, when it comes to the legal, political stuff, I get it. Israel's legitimate, I guess. There are questions about that, and I might get into that. But at the same time, I don't have a dog in that fight. I'm not trying to get rid of them. I'm okay with them being there. And that's exactly how Tucker Carlson felt. He's just trying to figure out what's so special, because we are being told as Christians we are supposed to support this modern nation. But some of us are looking at it biblically, and we're not seeing the connection between modern Israel and ancient Israel. Just because they have the same name. But again, do they have the same beliefs? Do they have the same faith? Do they have the same values? No, they don't. I'll say more about that in a little bit.
To every people in every nation, does every nation have the same right to its own homeland, to its own physical land that you say Israel does?
I feel like we're in a rabbit hole here.
No, I think it's a very straightforward question. No, but does that right extend to other countries other than Israel?
But the most important thing that is going on in our culture right now is whether or not the people that are yelling in the streets from the river to the sea, whether that's a legitimate point of view to say that there should not be a Jewish homeland. There should not be a Jewish state.
You'll never hear me say
period.
That. I just want to know.
I know you haven't said it, but that's the argument.
It's one of the arguments going on globally. And the United States, excuse me, has a pretty narrow view, I would say, in our media culture, of what's happening around the world. There are plenty of countries having this debate. Stonehenge is a lot older than the first temple in Israel.
All right. And we'll say more about that here in a little bit. I like that he kind of brings that up. But again, I think what he was trying to do, he was trying to get Huckabee to admit that he believes there is something special and exceptional about Israel. While I think all Christians would agree, other nations have a right to exist, Russia, China, all these things, but like none of them have just this divine, mandate, this divine, covenant with God, and this special. That's the claim you're making that is outrageous and that is unbiblical. And so, so he brings up the Stonehenge thing. And I think he's doing that too, just showing how ancient Ireland is. Now you've got all these, Muslims that are kind of taking over. They're losing England, and they're losing their culture and everything. And he's just trying to, he's trying to ask Huckabee, do you think that English people, have the same rights to their land? Because they've been there for so long. He's just trying to see if, when Huckabee switches to some of the political principles, if he's going to apply them evenly to other countries. But he can't, because that's not what his beliefs are. Mike Huckabee believes that this one particular nation of Israel has a very special promise from God, and they are an exception to all other countries. And that is just wrong. And so, but again, Huckabee, while he's a charming fellow, he's a little bit slippery. And again, he did way better than Ted Cruz. But let's go ahead and watch some more clips.
Here's the point. We're talking about Christian Zionism. The idea that as a Christian, I believe in both the Old and the New Testament. Why wouldn't I? I'm a person of the book. There are 80 million evangelical Christians in the United States. What makes us who we are is our adherence to the Scripture. Our belief that the Bible, all of it, not part of it, but all of it, is the Word of the living God.
Yeah.
So if I believe in the Old and the New Testament, I do believe that there is a very specific call to the Jewish people that started with Abraham, and he called them out of what is now modern-day Iraq, said, "Come where I send you." He came. This is the land. Genesis 12:3. He says, "I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you." In Genesis 17, he looks out at the world, he says, "Look, and this is where I'm giving you the land."
All right. So, very important thing here is it's very important that we make a clear determination of what biblically connects you to that promise that God made to Abraham. They're going to get into this a little bit later, but what Huckabee is going to say is provably wrong. And this is a common tactic. So he starts making references to the Bible. He starts making references to what God said to Abraham, but then connecting it to the Jewish people. And I don't really want to get into this, but we've talked a lot about in this program that, Abraham was not the first Jew. Okay. Jew means of Judah. That's people under the kingdom of Judah. Jewish is a term that came later. Okay. And so the thing is, to be Jewish, you have to be under that kingdom and authority of Judah, of David's throne, that, by the way, Jesus Christ is now seated on. And so the reality is you cannot claim to be of Judah and Jewish when you're not following the Lion of the tribe of Judah. You can't do that. And so again, I will say more about that. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Huckabee does nothing in this entire interview to coherently show the modern day Jews' connection to the covenant with Abraham. Now, he is going to make a very theological statement that is so easy to debunk. In fact, I'm calling on dispensationalists to call this out. All right, I'll show you in a little bit. Huckabee is going to make a claim that even a dispensationalist should be upset about. And this ought to really upset you. I'm not seeing any outrage on this, probably because Fox News hasn't told you to be outraged. I'm telling you to be outraged on this. But we're going to get to that clip here in a little bit. I'm still trying to play these in order, but it's scary how much stuff he is getting very wrong. So let's go ahead and play this next clip, because I'm going to show you a contradiction that he does too.
Look, you'll never hear me say that. What you will hear me say is I'm confused by what the definitions are. So let's go through this. You've appealed to Genesis. Genesis 15 says it's Abram, it's pre-Abraham, it's Abram, receives from God the news that his descendants will inherit the land. And you tell me as the theologian if I'm getting this wrong, but from the Euphrates to the Nile. I think that's right. And that would include like basically the entire Middle East. That would be the Levant, so that would be Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. It would also be big parts of Saudi Arabia and Iraq. It would be,
I'm not sure it would go that far. I mean, it would be a big piece of land, but here's the point.
It would be a lot of places that are now countries.
Now, what Tucker is talking about here, this is very, very important, because the passage everybody goes to say that the land belongs to Israel, here's what they're doing. They will show you a map today that shows Israel's current borders. And they will tell you that land in those borders belongs to the Jews because of God's promise to Abraham. Here's what Tucker is going to try to bring up, and is going to bring up, is that, wait a minute, that passage shows the land being much bigger than that. Okay. And I'm amazed at how ignorant Baptists are about just pretty much everything. But one day on Facebook, I brought this up. It's like, hey, when you're talking about the land of Israel, what are you even talking about? Because which borders? I brought up the same thing. Are you talking about current borders? Or are you talking about the biblical borders? You talking about 1968-7 borders or 1948 borders? Throughout time, it's had different borders and it's possessed different chunks of the land. What's been called Israel has changed a lot throughout time. So the thing is, you're saying, when you talk about the land of Israel, and then you go to Genesis 15, well, you need to understand that's talking about a massive portion of land. And that's very important because of the fact that, okay, if Israel does take over Gaza and the West Bank and things like that, that was theirs. Well, guess what's going to happen after that? They're going to start having problems with Lebanon. They're going to start having problems with Iraq. They're going to start having problems with Syria. They're going to start having problems with Egypt. And then you know what they're going to say every single time? Well, we got to protect our people. We share borders and these people are hostile to us. They're threatening us. Well, maybe you're threatening them because they know you want to take some of their land. They know you think that God promised you that land that they've had for thousands of years. And you know what Christians are going to do? I mean, that's what God said. And then all they've got to do is just start on Fox News showing you a new map, showing more territory. And you're like, yep, that's theirs. That's what God promised them. This is what these wars will never, ever end if we continue supporting this. Do you want your children going and fighting and dying for Israel to make a land grab? I certainly don't want mine doing that. It's not a worthy cause. And so Tucker is rightfully pointing out the fact that, you're making an application of that passage to this little sliver of land. But what are you going to do, later on? Are you going to continue expanding that? And it's like Huckabee, it's like that's not even on his radar, but it's like it definitely is. But he's going to say some things here that did shock a lot of people, and there is some backlash over.
Particular area that we're talking about now, Israel, is a land that God gave through Abraham to a people that he chose. It was a people, a place, and a purpose. We can look at it that way.
I wish I had time to get sidetracked in this. A people, a place, and a purpose. Okay, I don't have time to get into this. Purpose fulfilled. Purpose fulfilled. The purpose was so the Messiah could come and bless all the nations. Jesus did that through his death, burial, and resurrection. Purpose fulfilled. Why are we fighting over the land?
Zionism. I want to go back because that's where we started.
I'm not going to let you off on this because you have said it 3 times that God gave this land to this people. And so it is entirely fair for me with respect to ask, what land are you talking about? Because I just read Genesis 15, as I have many times. Mm-hmm. And that land, I think it says, from the Nile to the Euphrates, which is, once again, basically the entire Middle East. So God gave that land to his people, the Jews, or he didn't. You're saying he did. What does that mean? Does Israel have the right to that land? Because you're appealing to Genesis.
Yeah.
You're saying that's the original deed.
It would be fine if they took it all.
Boom. Right there is, again, that's shocking a lot of people. That doesn't shock me. That is what these people believe. People are acting like this greater Israel project is conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's in the theology that's driving a lot of this. They see that promise that God made to Abraham, and Schofield, that rat, in his notes, put in there that God never fulfilled. That was never fulfilled. They never possessed all of that land. And that is an absolute lie. I've done whole videos showing multiple scriptures where it clearly states that God gave them all the land that he had promised. No, that has been fulfilled. Yes, they didn't hang on to it for very long because of their disobedience. God told them if they did the abominations of the heathen, the land was going to vomit them out. But either way, God did keep his promise to Abraham. God did give them all of that land. There were long periods in history where they had it, and the Bible explicitly tells us they had it. But no, we're being told it's never been fulfilled, and you've got people trying to help prophecy be fulfilled. Like, we've got to get them all that land. This has still got to happen just because that rat Schofield told you that. No, my King James Bible tells me they did get all that land. I don't care what you say as a theologian. I don't care who you cite as an authority. I've got the word of God on my side. They did get all that land, and they lost it for a reason. And understand, there's no reason to take it back because it was a people. God had a plan and a purpose, and the purpose was fulfilled. On the old covenant, it waxed old, it vanished away, it's gone. We have a new and better covenant. We no longer have to worship in Jerusalem. Jesus Christ said, all power is given me in heaven and earth. Go therefore and preach the gospel in every nation. We can go anywhere. We can go anywhere we want. We don't have, there's no need for that land. There's no need for a temple. We don't need any sacrifices. Jesus finished all that. Why are Christians fighting over a land? It makes no sense at all. I understand why those who deny that Jesus is the Christ would be trying to get the land. I understand why the spirit of Antichrist would promote that kind of thing. I understand Satan never got his way. Satan, when he said, I will sit also upon the mountain of the congregation in the sides of the north, referring to the temple, he never got to do that. I can understand why he would want to take that land back. I understand why he would want to build a temple there. Here's what I don't understand: why Christians want to facilitate that. That's what I don't understand.
That's what we're talking about here today.
What would be fine? Well, it's exactly what we're talking about today.
But here's what I don't think
you think it would be fine if the state of Israel took over all of Jordan?
They don't want to take it over. That they're not asking to take it over.
But you're saying that the reason
Right
that
now.
Israel is legitimate, has this inherent right to.
Listen, he's saying they're not trying to take it over. I promise you, I'm not a gambling man, but I'd bet $1 million if I had it that, if Israel were to take over, all of the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and all that within a decade, they're all of a sudden going to be under the threat from the next chunk of land that they want. And you know what they're going to want to do? Take it over. And you know what America's going to do? Support them. And you know what all the Baptists are going to do? I'll stand with Israel, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Just barf.
In part because God gave it to his people. And I am going to the same Bible that you're referring to and noticing that that is a huge piece of land. So if God gave them that land, then they have a right to take it now by your definition, unless I'm missing something completely.
Well, I think you're missing something because they're not asking to go back to take all of that, but they are asking to at least take the land that they now occupy, they now live in, they now own legitimately, and it is a safe haven for them.
Well, but may I ask though, it's because you're explaining what Christian Zionism is and your theological beliefs. And you think you just said it would be fine with you if the state of Israel took all of Jordan, all of Syria, all of Lebanon.
That's really not exactly what I'm trying to say.
I'm asking,
Tucker.
Is that what you said? I thought that's what you just said.
It was somewhat of a hyperbolic statement in that, if that's what you feel like that we're talking about, but it isn't. We're talking about this land that Israel, the state of Israel, now lives in and wants to have peace in. They're not trying to take over Jordan. They're not trying to take over Syria. They're not trying to take over Iraq or anywhere else. But they do want to protect
Lebanon?
their people. No, they're not trying to take over Lebanon.
But you're saying that as a religious man, as a Christian Zionist, you agree with a lot of religious communities here in Israel that the justification for this country is theological. It's a contract between God and his people. And I'm telling you that that contract includes a tract of land that is much larger than the current nation state.
So you may be a bigger Zionist than even the Jews are that live in Israel.
I'm trying to understand the implications of your theology for geopolitics, because you're saying that the present government of Israel has a moral right to take over what are now other people's countries.
No, I didn't say that, Tucker.
Then what are you saying?
I'm simply saying that the people who live in Israel, I think, have a right to have security, have safety. They have a right to be able to live in this land that they have a connection to for 30.
I told myself when I said a prayer that I would not get annoyed.
All right. So he's getting frustrated because this is a good point. They keep saying, they keep talking about Israel and they're referring to the current map. Just let them have this little strip of land. God gave this to them in Genesis 15, Tucker Carlson. But wait a minute. That passage is showing a much bigger land. Are you sure this is where it's going to stop? Are you sure this is where it's going to end? And he keeps saying, they're not trying. Right now they're not, because again, when it comes to conquering land, it's got to be strategic. You don't do it overnight. It takes a lot of time. And he's just trying to point out the fact this thing is not going to end anytime soon. And, and people need to at least be honest about whatever their plan or their end game is on these things. So let's watch this next clip.
If Israel were to say, God gave us in Genesis 15 all of Lebanon, all of Syria, all the way up to Iraq, would that be legitimate in your view?
I don't think in this particular day and time they're asking for it.
Would it be legitimate?
I'm not sure that it would be.
Why? Because you just said that God gave it to them.
Because I think that there is an understanding that the people of Israel today, now if they end up getting attacked by all these places and they win that war and they take that land, then okay, that's...
There it is. Notice what he said. If they get attacked by them. So yeah, he's showing a huge double standard here when he's trying to act like, no, I don't think it would be right for them to take that land. Tucker Carlson points out, seems inconsistent considering this is what the passage says. Well, if they get attacked, I promise you they'll get attacked. I promise you that. And it could be legit attack, could be a false flag attack, could be something that they let happen, could be something too that one of these terrorist organizations that the CIA funds or something makes it happen. I promise you, when nations need to be attacked, they always get attacked. Remember 9/11, remember Pearl Harbor, remember the sinking of the Lusitania. Whatever nations need to get the will of the people behind a war, those things always magically happen.
Whole nother discussion. But you and I started out. We started talking about something simple: Christian Zionism.
But it turns out it's not simple, because the core of Christian Zionism, you said, and I'm quoting you, is the understanding, the belief, the theological understanding that Jews have a moral and legal, we went through the legal,
biblical,
moral deriving from the biblical, from the promises in our Bible, which we share with the Jewish people, the first part of it, the Old Testament, that it derives from God's promise to the Jews. And so I have two questions. What are the borders of that? And who are those people in 2026?
That is such a great question. Okay. This should be a very simple, easy, straightforward answer. What are the borders? Because again, the borders matter a lot. If you use the borders of the Bible, we've got a huge problem politically, because these other countries are not going to like it. We are going to have a world war. So are we just, if we're going to do today's borders, well, then why are we claiming a biblical connection? Because the Bible explains a completely different border. But also, if we're saying this belongs to the Jews, what makes someone a Jew? Is it a bloodline thing, or is it a religious thing? And Tucker's going to get into this, and Huckabee is going to do a Baptists were known for not dancing, but boy, do we know how to dance around issues. And he does some pretty impressive dance steps on here. This is my thing. I keep asking. I keep trying to get dispensations. Is it ethnic or is it religious? Is it an ethnic thing or is it a faith thing? Because if they try to say it's an ethnic thing, I'm going to take them to school on the Bible. If they try to say it's a religious thing, I'm also going to take them to school on the Bible, because they don't have the faith of Abraham. You're going to have to go against the words of Jesus in so many ways. Tucker Carlson didn't really know how to confront Huckabee with that, but it's Huckabee in trying to just make, it's both. He's basically, it's whatever we need it to be, but he's going to make some claims in here that are even a dispensationalist ought to get upset over.
And you're not the first person I've asked, but you're the most reasonable, most gentle, most theologically informed person. So I'm really hoping for an answer.
Yeah.
The first question was the borders. I can't get an answer. Yeah. What those borders are. So I'm going to give up. But the second question is every bit as pressing, which is who are the people? Who are the modern? Yes. Who are the descendants? So we know, and I believe, and I agree with you as a Christian, that God promised this land from modern day Iraq to modern day Egypt to this people, the Jews, to Abram's, actually.
Now I want you to notice too that Tucker and Huckabee both make it about Abraham's descendants. Okay. Now they do this thanks to Schofield, who in his notes, when it talks about Abraham's seed, made it descendants. Every Bible translation that has come after Schofield has changed the word from seed to descendants or offspring. And so they are both rightfully confused for a reason. They're not King James guys. And so they're going to be confused on this. They're having a conversation about descendants when they should be having a conversation about the seed. If you have a conversation about the seed, though, that Paul clears that up for us in Galatians chapter 3. It's referring to Jesus Christ. But again, so their error that both of them are making here is because of other Bible versions, but it's an error that dispensationalists share with them.
Not to Abram's descendants, as it says in Genesis 15. Who are his descendants now, and how do we know who they are?
I think they're the Jews, and we know who they are because they've always been a Jewish people. There has been an unbroken line of Jewish people, and they've lived in this land for 3,800 years. Sometimes not very many of them, because they were chased out all over the world. They were hunted down. They were almost annihilated during the Holocaust. They came back. To this day, Tucker, they represent, you know how many Jews there are in the whole world?
Please,
No,
I understand. Look, but first of all, the greatest genocide of Jews no one ever mentions was by the Romans, where they were literally banned from Jerusalem for 500 years.
Yeah, of course.
And it's all awful. And I'm opposed to all of that. I'm opposed to mass killing of anybody, period. I'm opposed to
hear
killing.
you say that.
I mean it.
Yeah.
And I hope
I
we can
believe
agree
that.
on that.
I believe that.
My question is, and it's not a bumper sticker answer, it's a sincere answer, how do we know? Because what you're saying is that certain people have a title to a highly contested region. They own it in some deep sense. So I think it's fair to ask, who are they and how do we know? So the current prime minister's ancestors weren't from here within recorded history. He has no deed. Bibi Netanyahu, on one side, his family's from Poland. They're from Eastern Europe. So how do we know that he has a connection to the people who God promised the land to, Abram's descendants? How do we know that?
Well, if you take the genealogies that come not only from the Old but the New Testament, you see that there is a historical connection through the entirety of the Old and the New Testament that details the Jewish connection to this land.
Does that include Bibi's family? How do we know that if his family
if they were
comes here,
scattered,
but how do we know it's the same people? Why is that crazy? If you say to me,
if they speak the same language, if they worship the same God, if they follow the same Bible, if they follow the same cultures and traditions, and they always pray next year in Jerusalem, and they pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and they pray facing toward Jerusalem, does that not give you a little bit of a clue as to who they are?
Let's go through those.
All right. So, yeah, if they worship the same God, if they, using the same Bible, if they worship the same God, hey, dispensationalists, do you think that the Jews worship the same God as we do? I would be interested in seeing if a dispensationalist was come on here and to tell me that Jews worship the same God. So what they're basically trying to do, they're trying to figure out, who the real Jews are, is what they're doing. Because again, yeah, I mean, most of them are probably European. Netanyahu is from Poland. They keep referring to how they have a deed to the land because of their DNA, but they haven't proved their DNA. And he talks a lot about that. They haven't proved their genealogy. And so let's watch some more on this.
I think it's wonderful as someone who loves language. Netanyahu's parents did not speak Hebrew. Okay. They didn't live in this region. Netanyahu, the founders of this country, were mostly secular. Some of them were avowed atheists. They were not praying for the peace of Jerusalem. They weren't praying at all because they didn't believe in God. There's no genealogy linking their families to the people of this land 3,000 years ago. They're not. So how do we know, since they didn't share a language, they didn't share a religion, they had no religion whatsoever, how do we know that they had a right to come here from Eastern Europe and
but they were scattered.
Take the land?
They were scattered to Eastern Europe. They were scattered all over the world. There were many in Ethiopia. They were in Russia. They were in Poland. They were throughout Asia. Jews were all over the place, but they were still Jews. But they were still Jews.
Okay, so then let me get to the...
Okay, so all right. Yeah, and the Bible talked about how that would happen. They'd be scattered around, all that. It's like, but they were still Jews. Okay, but what made them still Jews? Their DNA. Is that what it means? So does that mean they didn't really assimilate with these other nations? They only married other Jews? There was no mixture of anything like that. Does it mean, and now he's seeming to imply too, that they continued their culture, that they continued their faith. This is my thing. Okay. Jews who reject the new covenant, how are they still Jews? Who does Mike Huckabee think? Because when it comes to Jews too, what did that term mean originally? Again, it meant originally they're from the southern kingdom of Judah. What did it mean in Jesus's day? What did it mean when Revelation was written? Who was John talking about when he referred to those who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie, but are the synagogue of Satan? What was Paul talking about when he said he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly? It's a circumcision of the heart. What is the Bible describing when it talks about these different things? And that means something to have the faith of the Jews. The Jews were a ethnic people. They were a national people, and they had a covenant with God. They had a law that God gave them. They were promised a Messiah. When the Messiah came and many of the Jews rejected them, my question is, what gave them a continued claim on those things? And why are we disconnecting, what God promised the Jews from the ones who were obedient and accepted Jesus as the Messiah? Again, so the reality is, it's the Jews, the unbelieving Jews, who started a new faith. And that's the people that we are trying to give the land to today. The descendants, the physical, maybe, spiritual for sure, of a people who rejected the Messiah, of people who are prophesied to come, that were antichrist. Okay? This is the Jewish people who reject Christ are antichrist. I've had dispensationalists admit to me that is true, that they are an antichrist religion. So why does it make sense to support giving the land to a people of antichrist faith? Makes no sense. That's not the faith of Abraham. So let's go and watch some more.
I think it's wonderful as someone who loves language.
Oh wait, all right. Sorry, we already showed that clip. Let me go ahead and get it to the next one. I think this is the right one here.
It's a foundational question. Are you speaking of an ethnic group or a religious group?
Well, I think you're looking at, for many people, it is religious. There are people who may not have a deep religious connection to Judaism, but they're still Jews.
Okay, so it's an ethnic category.
It is ethnic, but it is also religious. It is rooted in religion. You can't take it out of it. Now, that means
then how can an atheist?
Well, I will tell you this. There are some people who say, I'm Christian. They never go to church. They never pray. They never read their Bible. They don't tithe.
But they're not entitled to citizenship on the basis of that.
Well,
they're
but
not
I'm saying
entitled
that they still call themselves Christian, even though they identify in that way.
Here's the difference. You're saying that people who have this identification have a deed to a huge chunk of land on the Mediterranean. Okay, so there's, it's a right. You keep telling me it's a right, and so it's totally fair to say, if you come to my house and say, I've got the title to your house, I get to ask, may I see it?
Okay, so a couple things there. So they're bringing up this whole, is this religious or ethnic? And I don't know if I have it in here. It might be in the next clip. But Huckabee mentioned how, they won wars. They even bought some of the land. All that's true. I mean, the Jews did, if you look at some of the history of it, they did buy a lot of the land that was considered worthless. And, Jews they're pretty impressive with some of the things that they can do. They went and irrigated the land. They made it blossom. They made it valuable. And a lot of the Muslims later regretted it. That's tough luck. They did get these things in a lot of legitimate ways. But Tucker is just trying to show, you're saying it belongs to the Jews. Is it because of their ethnicity or because of their religion? And Huckabee is just like, it's a little bit of both is what he's doing here. But let's go ahead. I want you to see the next clip, because this is where we're really kind of getting to the heart of, where some of the errors are. So check this one out.
Patiently for an answer. Does this right derive from religious affiliation or from genetics?
And I would say it's both. But I would also say that when you said the Christians were kicked out, Tucker, Christianity is growing in Israel.
Okay, but
and there is a big lie that goes out there. But no, let me finish this, because I keep hearing that.
Right. So he mentions ethnic, religious. It's a little bit of both. But wait, you should be able to explain how that works. Okay, because when you're telling somebody they legally and especially biblically have a right to something, you ought to have a way of displaying that from the scriptures. And Huckabee doesn't really do that. It's just kind of, hey, whatever you need for whatever, argument you're having at the time, that counts. And so let's watch this next clip.
Abram's descendants are the ones who have the right to have this land, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we do genetic testing on everybody in the land and find
Abraham's descendants. So wouldn't that include Muslims? Wouldn't that include those of Ishmael? Huckabee, you got to get specific on that.
out who Abram's descendants are? It's really simple. We've cracked the human genome. We can do that. Why don't we do that? Would you be against doing that?
I have no idea what that would prove. I mean,
Really?
maybe it would be.
What do you mean? It would prove who Abram's descendants are and who has a right to live here and who doesn't, according to the theology that you yourself just explained. And so
Now, this is funny too, because I've been saying on this program, you know, the Abrahamic covenant was never a genetic thing. From the very beginning, there were people of that nation, even before Jacob, that were not physical descendants of Abraham. Abraham's entire house, hundreds of people were circumcised, and they were a part of the covenant. And so, and we see throughout the scriptures, you have many people who convert and become Jews because it's not an ethnic thing. It was about covenant. It was a religious thing. It was never ethnic. But yet today we've made it about ethnicity. Why? Because that plays to our sensitivities as Americans who are all about race and, you know, everything's racial, African American, Asian American, you know, and we're always making things racial and ethnic. And that's not what Israel was. Obviously, most of the people had a physical relation because they had authority over their houses, unlike we do in America today. And they were commanded to teach their children to do these things. And they did to a certain extent. So, but either way, it was never about being a physical descendant of Abraham. That would have made it where many people who were a part of the nation couldn't have been included. So that's just wrong. But listen to what Huckabee says here, because it's one of these things. It's their position, it floats around. It's ethnic when they need to be ethnic. It's religious when they need to be religious. And they try to make it a little bit of both, you know, because if somebody is ethnically a Jew, but they're not religiously a Jew, they still have claim to the land. You know, but wait a minute. What if somebody is religiously a Jew, but not physically a Jew? He's going to get into that. What would we call those people?
I'm very confused as to why we don't do that. If you believe the theology that you've just explained to me,
Would we do that all over the world?
well,
and everybody
this is the only country in the world that you've said has this covenant with God, that this people have a moral and legal right to the land.
What about people who convert to Judaism? Would they have a right?
Well, you've just said.
I mean,
that
there are
it's
converts to Judaism, so
you just told
they
me,
can make Aliyah. They may not have.
You've just
DNA.
told me that it doesn't matter. You told me moments ago, I'm trying to keep track,
Okay.
that it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God or whether or not you practice Torah Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism, which is something else that I don't even know if we should, I don't even know what that means. But it doesn't matter whether you're, quote, a religious Jew or not. What matters is that you are part of the Jewish people to whom God gave this land that extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. And so if you believe that, wouldn't you want to know with a burning passion who those people are? And because of science, we can now know who those people are.
All right. So notice how he mentioned ethnic Jews, or not ethnic Jews, Jewish converts. So according to Huckabee, if somebody converts to Judaism, that then gives them a right to the land. Okay. So then now it sounds like, you know, you're saying it's a religious thing. Well, if it's a religious thing, Judaism is the wrong religion. Judaism is the wrong religion. Jesus was their Messiah, and Huckabee knows that. They rejected their Messiah, and so in reality, they started a new false religion. And listen to what he calls these people who are a part of this false religion. Judaism is a false religion. It denies Jesus is the Christ. They do not have the faith of Abraham. Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. If you reject Jesus, you don't have the faith of Abraham. If you reject Jesus, you reject the law of Moses. Moses said to follow the prophet like unto him. If you reject Jesus, you reject the command of Israel, who told his brethren to follow Judah until Shiloh come, and unto him should the gathering of people be. They are going against Israel the man, Moses, and the law of Moses. They're going against Abraham when they reject Jesus Christ. And listen to what Huckabee says here, because this is shocking. This should upset even a dispensationalist. I want to see dispensationalists condemn this.
So why aren't we finding out?
I guess you could propose a DNA test for everybody who comes here, everybody who lives here. But the point
I'm comfortable with secular nation states where it's none of this is done on the basis of blood. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'll just say that.
But there are people who may not have bloodlines, but who have converted to Judaism. Are they going to be able to live here? Are you going to kick them out?
By your standards, they can't live here.
No,
because
I've
you just
never
told
said,
me
that
they have a right to live here because God gave them the land because they're the descendants of Abram.
They're the descendants of Abraham. But if they're the spiritual descendants of Abraham and they've now decided that they're converting to Judaism, then do they have a right to live in Israel?
Did you hear that? Spiritual descendants of Abraham. Ambassador Huckabee, can you explain to me why Jews are spiritual descendants of Abraham? That makes no sense. I know Mike Huckabee has read his Bible before. I know he's read John chapter 8 and verse 39. It says, they answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus saith unto them, if ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. But now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Ye do the deeds of your father. They say unto him, we were not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. Jesus saith unto them, if God were your father, ye would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Because ye cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father you would do. You want to know who unbelieving Jews are a spiritual descendant of? Satan is who they are a spiritual descendant of, which is why John referred to them as the synagogue of Satan. And understand, in John 8, Jesus acknowledged that they physically were Abraham's children. He acknowledged that. But at the same time, he's rebuking them for rejecting him and showing that they weren't Abraham's children. We all understand this passage. Jesus did not contradict himself when in one spot he says, I know you're Abraham's children. And when he says, if you are Abraham's children, there's no contradiction there, because in one place he's speaking physically, in another place he's speaking spiritually. Spiritually, they were of the devil. And so understand, if someone converts to Judaism, how would that make them a spiritual descendant of Abraham? Abraham was of faith. You know what the Jews' problems were? They had no faith. And so you're going to call somebody who converts to Judaism a spiritual descendant of Abraham? That is nuts. Why are dispensationalists not upset? I've seen Baptists praising Huckabee. Baptists have been praising Huckabee and how he handled this interview and everything. Why are none of you condemning that? Listen, you don't have to be replacement theology. You don't have to hold my theology to recognize how wrong it is to refer to Jews as spiritual descendants of Abraham. They're spiritual descendants of the Pharisees. They're spiritual descendants of them, but they are not. They are not spiritual descendants of Abraham. And you know what? Huckabee ought to be embarrassed that he made that claim. But, he was trying to be consistent with something that's false. This is what happens when you have bad theology. You can't be consistent. There is no consistency in dispensational theology, none. And I think if you pressed Huckabee on that, he would admit, yeah, no, we're actually the spiritual descendants of Abraham. I'll bet Mike Huckabee knows the song Father Abraham. I'll bet he knows that song. That says, he had many sons, I am one of them, and so are you. We don't mean that physically. We mean that spiritually. We are the spiritual descendants of Abraham, not Jews who reject Christ, not Gentiles who convert to Judaism. What a nonsense claim that he made. I can't think of a Christian group that would hold to that theology. And yet it's gone completely uncondemned by Baptists. He has been praised by Baptists, even though they heard him say that. Did that not make you cringe when you heard that? I want to hear dispensational Baptists condemn what Huckabee said there.
Prime Minister talking about? Why would he refer to the Palestinians as Amalek? What is Amalek?
You would have to ask him. I don't know. I know what Amalek is. I do understand 1 Samuel 16. I get all
15.
that.
1 Samuel 15.
But I do understand.
And it's widely known. So if you say our enemy is Amalek and we are proceeding on the basis of God's commands to us, you are calling for genocide. Tell me how I'm missing something.
Because if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they could have done it in 2.5 hours.
We can debate what's happened in Gaza. I'm asking you why the leader of this country.
All right. So I've got just one more clip I want to play. I'm going to try to start shutting this down. But yes, that claim of Amalek, that is how they justify genocides. Tucker was right, and he talked about it earlier. You go back in the scriptures, God told him, kill everyone. Kill the animals, kill the children, kill the women, kill everyone in that situation. Now, Christians, we don't believe in doing that kind of thing. We do not believe, we believe God commanded them back then to do that, and there's a reason for that, and that's another subject for another day. We don't believe in doing that kind of thing today. Okay. We believe blessed are the peacemakers. We are not for killing women and children. We don't believe in ethnic cleansing, but there's exceptions when it comes to Israel for some reason. You know why? Because Baptists do the same thing. They'll go back and read those Old Testament commands for Israel to go wipe all the people out. And because dispensationalists think the Israel of today is the same as the Israel back then, I guess I can't really condemn them doing that. God told them to do it back then. Why would it be wrong for them to do it now? It would be very wrong for them to do it now because, again, Israel and that land served its purpose. They're supposed to be evangelizing the people, not killing the people. Go read your New Testament and you see any calls for slaughtering nations and things like that. We are not commanded to do that. In fact, he commanded his Jewish disciples, he commanded them to basically put up with oppression and to be willing to suffer reproach and suffer shame. You're going to go to prison. And nowhere is Jesus calling for revolutions, and nowhere is he calling us to just conquer other nations and things like that. And so any Christian who would support modern day Israel doing some kind of genocide is so backwards in their theology, it's not even funny. And yes, and Christians, we ought to be horrified that they're referring to people today as Amalek. They're not Amalek. Amalek already got theirs. They're not Amalek. That is not even a good application. That is wrong to do that kind of thing. But it is things like that are why people will accuse Israel of committing a genocide. And of course, these people, they always defend him. And he said it. If they wanted to commit a genocide, they could have done it in 2 hours. I'm going to play this one final clip. And he asks a question here. And it's like, how come nobody's answering this question? I do not consider myself a political expert, especially when it comes to global things. But even I know the very simple answer to this question. So let's watch this final clip.
Then I have to ask you, what is that? And is that kind of thinking consistent with Western values and with Christianity? Do we as Christians believe it's okay to kill people's children?
No, we don't. And neither do the Israelis, because they didn't go after their children. If they'd have wanted to kill all their children, Tucker, they've got the military capacity. They could have done it in less than a day.
I've heard you say that.
I know.
I mean, I guess
so
they could
have done
them. Okay, but
why didn't they? Why didn't they?
I think there are a lot of decent people in Israel who don't want that. But I'm talking.
Do you think that?
All right. Why didn't they? Yes, I agree. I agree. Israel has nuclear weapons. I agree. If they wanted to wipe out Gaza, if they wanted to take over the West Bank, they could do it. If they wanted to ethnically cleanse all the Palestinians from Israel, I think they might even have the ability. I don't know for sure. I don't know enough about military strategies and things, but I think they probably could take a lot more of the land from, Syria and Lebanon and some of these places, especially if America backed them. I think they probably do have the the military capability of doing these things. Here's what they don't have, and that is the political will to do it. That's why it's not happening. Israel is dependent on the support of the United States of America. There's been all kinds of sanctions against them. There's a lot of countries that have warrants out for Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest. The UN is constantly condemning them. And then, of course, in America, just anti-Semitism. But either way, all these things they do, they have no teeth. You know why? Because America is such a powerful empire and we've got their back. And so when it comes to their conflicts, they have to be careful how far they push. If they're too harsh, then the world stage is going to go against them, and America might go against them. And one of the problems right now is America is losing its will to continue standing with Israel. Too many of our politicians are suffering as a result of their support for Israel. We're going into a midterm election, and because of things like X, people are able to see what's taking place over in Gaza. They're not able. We're seeing more than we're no longer in a situation where the only thing we see is what the mainstream media shows us. We are able to see what's going on. We do have people like Tucker Carlson and many others who are speaking out against the atrocities taking place by Israel, and so they have to be careful. They have to be careful because if they went too far, there would be too much international outrage. And so what Israel constantly does is whatever they can get away with. And they're always pushing, and they're always like, what can we get away with? And so they've got our government running cover for them. They've got Mike Huckabee running cover for them. They've got Donald Trump running cover for them. And so they've been very emboldened, and they've killed 70, 80,000. They tried to dispute the numbers, but the low numbers I'm hearing that even I think Huckabee accepted, 70,000 that have died in Gaza. And of course, October 7th was horrific, and there should have been, payback for that. I think there's around 1,200, but 70,000, we're going that far. You're leveling their entire city in response. This seems unnecessary. But at the same time, no, it's not genocide because they could do more. They're holding back. Yeah, we are holding them back. Our nation is what's holding them back. They would have done way more if it were not for our nation holding them back. And so that's why. There's no doubt about it. They can do more. They want to do more, but politically, it's not expedient for them right now because if America turns on Israel, they're in trouble. They need our money. They need our military support. And so we need to stay outraged, folks. We need to keep standing against this. Thank God the younger generation is not buying into this dispensational nonsense. Most of the people in my generation are, while they're not completely converting, most of them are at least being pretty quiet about it because they are, I think they're instinctively ashamed of this horrific theology. And many dispensations are even moderating their positions. And even if they believe in a future for Israel, they recognize they are bad right now. And you know what? I take that as a win. I take that as a victory. We as a nation must stand against Israel and this warmongering that is going on. It's not going to stop with Gaza. They're going to keep provoking. They're going to keep provoking. And yes, people are going to retaliate. You keep provoking people, eventually they're going to retaliate. I believe in turning the other cheek. I think as Christians, we should turn the other cheek. But if you come and you just keep messing with me, you keep smiting me on my cheek, pretty soon I might lose my cool and I might beat the tar out of you. And I probably shouldn't do that. But when it happens, you probably shouldn't act like a victim in that situation. And as America, we got to stop getting involved in these things. We got to stop getting involved in these Middle East conflicts and prodding and pushing and provoking and then acting like a victim when they do something to us. But the reality is, there's a lot of money to be made with war. There's a lot of power to be obtained with war. And you know what? Let's learn from the mistakes of 9/11. Let's learn from the mistakes of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. And let's not continue making these mistakes. And Christians, can we please stop letting them misuse the Bible to get us on board with this nonsense? There's no value in it. Why did Jesus say, "Blessed are the peacemakers"? How do you justify all this warmongering when Jesus said things like that? I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. And so, unfortunately, this Zionist theology, it was deeply ingrained in the previous generation, and they're not going to lose it, folks. But that generation is dying out. The new Zionism is not in any meaningful way being passed on to the next generations. And thank God for that. Let's continue fighting this thing. They are losing and they know it. Israel right now is desperately trying to get away with what they can because they know they have but a short time when it comes to these things. The political will is not with them anymore. And we've got momentum. Let's keep it going. Let's keep standing against these things. Let's keep calling it out. We need more preachers to come out of the closet. If you are against Zionism, we need you coming out of the closet. We need these parrots out there doing their lame posts who aren't capable of opening the Bible and proving anything. Bible-believing Christians stand with Israel. We need to start making these people ashamed of themselves. They're embarrassing themselves right now, but it needs to be on a bigger scale because everybody sees through the nonsense. And so when it comes to this interview Tucker Carlson did, I'm so thankful he did it. I'm thankful for the conversations he's having, the things that are being advanced. I appreciate the fact that Huckabee did it. I hate his positions. I love his personality. I think he's a decent person, but I think he has horrible theology. And I wish there would have been some other follow-up questions. I wish he'd have pressed him on certain things more. I hope Baptists will get outraged at Mike Huckabee referring to Jewish converts as spiritual descendants of Abraham. What a ridiculous thing to say. What a horrifyingly unbiblical thing to say. And I want to see some dispensationalists man up and call this stuff out. I've had enough of this nonsense. And so this interview did not, I was so excited about it. I was hoping it was going to be like the Tucker Carlson or the Ted Cruz interview. It wasn't. Huckabee definitely was better for his side than Ted Cruz was. Ted Cruz was one of our biggest victories we've had in a long time. Mike Huckabee, I would say he scored some points for his side and just not being repulsive, not saying too many things that were completely stupid. But the two things that he said that I hope get a lot of attention is his reference to the spiritual descendants of Abraham and how he'd like for them to take it all, or it'd be fine if they took it all, referring to all the land of Genesis 15. I've been seeing those maps getting spread around social media. Keep sharing that, folks. If that's what these people are pushing for, they're pushing for an entire takeover of the Middle East. We don't want that. We want no part of that. We have nothing to gain from that as Americans. We have nothing to gain from that as Christians. We have everything to lose. And you know what? We have nothing to gain for just probably millions of people who would die if a war like that took place. And I wish we could get Christians to start acting like Christians and stop acting like a bunch of nut job Zionists, dispensationalists, just cheering on Armageddon. Because we're going to be raptured out before anything bad happens. It's like the pre-tribbers, it's like they're trying to set things up for the tribulation. It's like they're completely okay with that because they think we'll be out of here before it gets bad. But it's like, really, you want to facilitate, you want to set it up. You understand all those things are bad, right? But you want to create the mess because you think that's fine because you get to escape before there's any real problems. Man, it's stuff like that that makes me glad it's post-trib. Because if you succeed in messing this stuff up, you know, you deserve to participate in some of the trouble that comes with it. And you will. You will if it all begins in our lifetime. But either way, this was definitely an interesting interview and a great conversation between the two of them. One of these days, hopefully I can get an audience with Mike Huckabee. I'll ask him some important questions. I would ask him about the spiritual descendants of Abraham thing. So either way, I hope this was helpful and informative. Please like this, share it, spread the word on it, and we will see y'all next time. God bless.